These are 20 hidden facts about True Grit that even die-hard John Wayne fans have never heard. This is the story of how Hollywood's most famous cowboy almost didn't get the role that would define his legacy, how 7 actresses turned down the part of Mattie Ross, and why the Duke broke one of his most sacred personal rules for the first time in his career. True Grit gave John Wayne his only competitive Oscar after more than 40 years and roughly 175 films in Hollywood. Behind that golden statue lies a production filled with on-set brawls, political confrontations, terrified actors, blacklisted writers, and a leading man who genuinely doubted whether he could physically complete his own stunts. If you think you know everything about this classic Western, you're about to learn something new, so settle in, because this is the real story of True Grit. Fact number 1. The bidding war that almost cost Wayne the role. Most people don't realize that John Wayne almost never got the chance to play Rooster Cogburn at all. When Charles Portis's novel was still in galley form, before it even hit bookstores, Hollywood producers were already fighting over the screen rights. The Saturday Evening Post had serialized the story in May and June of 1968, and the buzz across town was enormous, with everyone knowing this would become a major property. Producer Hal B. Wallace won that bidding war by securing the rights for $300,000 plus a percentage of the gross. What makes this interesting is that he beat out John Wayne's own production company, Batjack Productions, by mere days, and the deal was finalized on May 10, 1968. Most actors would have accepted defeat and moved on to another project, but not John Wayne. When he learned he'd lost the rights, he made a declaration that echoed through Hollywood, saying, and I quote, "No matter who gets it, I'm going to play that part." Wayne was so certain this role belonged to him that he publicly staked his claim before anyone had even offered him the job, and he wasn't asking permission, he was making an announcement. Hal Wallace agreed with him, which turned out to be fortunate for the Duke. The producer immediately offered Wayne the lead role with a salary of $1 million plus 35% of gross profits, which was Wayne's standard rate at the time, and the fact that Wallace didn't hesitate tells you something about how perfect the casting seemed to everyone involved. Fact number 2. The Blacklisted writer Wayne championed. The story takes an unexpected turn here, because the person who adapted the novel for the screen had a past that should have made John Wayne her enemy. Screenwriter Marguerite Roberts was a former MGM staff writer who had been blacklisted in 1951 after refusing to testify before the House Un-American Activities Committee. For nearly a decade, she couldn't work in Hollywood, and her career was destroyed because she wouldn't name names. Everyone knows John Wayne stood as one of the most prominent conservatives in Hollywood, vocal about his politics and involved with the Motion Picture Alliance for the preservation of American ideals. You would think he'd want nothing to do with someone who'd been blacklisted. What actually happened tells a different story. When Wayne read Roberts' adaptation of True Grit, he called it the best script he had ever read, not one of the best, but the best. And he didn't just praise it privately. He actively championed her work and made sure she received screen credit for the adaptation. After production wrapped, Wayne wrote to Roberts personally, thanking her for what he called her magnificent screenplay, and particularly praising the beautiful ending in the cemetery, which Roberts had added entirely on her own, since that final scene where Rooster agrees to be buried in the Ross family cemetery wasn't in the novel at all. That tells you something about John Wayne that people often overlook. When the work was good, politics didn't matter to him. Talent outweighed ideology, at least when it came to making movies. Fact number 3. 7 actresses turned down the role of Mattie Ross. Now we get to the casting nightmare that nearly derailed the entire production, because finding someone to play 14-year-old Mattie Ross proved almost impossible. Mia Farrow was the first choice, and she was actually cast in the role, enthusiastic about playing the young heroine and seemingly the perfect fit. Something happened while she was filming Secret Ceremony in England that changed everything. Robert Mitchum, who was also in that film, warned Farrow about director Henry Hathaway's reputation, and cantankerous was the polite word people used to describe him. Hathaway was known for being difficult, demanding, and downright mean to actors, which spooked Farrow enough that she asked producer Hal Wallace to replace Hathaway with Roman Polanski, who had just directed her in Rosemary's Baby. That was an audacious request, essentially asking to swap out the director on a major production for her personal preference. Wallace refused, Farrow quit, and years later she would call leaving True Grit one of the biggest professional mistakes of her career. The search for a replacement became desperate. Mikel Carey, Sandra Locke, and Tuesday Weld were all under contract elsewhere and unavailable, while Sally Field was considered but passed over. Olivia Hussey, fresh off Romeo and Juliet, received an offer and responded with something that became legendary in Hollywood circles, declining by saying that John Wayne can't act, which got the offer promptly rescinded. Wayne tried to get his own candidates into the role, lobbying for his daughter Asa Wayne, but producers felt she lacked acting experience. He also recommended a young singer named Karen Carpenter after meeting her at a talent show, and again producers said no. Hal Wallace finally discovered Kim Darby while watching a television episode of Run for Your Life, and at 21 years old, she would play the 14-year-old Mattie. The age gap wasn't ideal casting, but Wallace saw something in her that made him take the chance, not knowing that Darby would bring her own set of challenges to the production. Fact number 4. Elvis Presley almost played Boeuf. The Mattie Ross casting was complicated, but the story of Boeuf, the Texas Ranger who joins the hunt for Tom Chaney, gets even stranger. Elvis Presley was the original choice for this role, and think about what that would have meant: the King and the Duke in the same Western, which would have been one of the most significant casting combinations in film history. Elvis was interested because the role would have been a departure from the lightweight musical comedies he'd been making, a chance to prove himself as a serious actor. The problem was his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, who controlled every aspect of Elvis's career with an iron fist and had one demand that killed the deal. Parker insisted that Elvis receive top billing over both John Wayne and Kim Darby. Top billing over John Wayne in a John Wayne Western was never going to happen. The producers refused. Elvis lost out on what could have been a career-changing role, and the part went to Glenn Campbell instead, a decision made partly to secure a hit theme song for the film. Campbell was honest about his limitations as an actor, later joking, "I'd never acted in a movie before, and every time I see True Grit I think my record's still clean." Director Hathaway was characteristically blunt about the decision, calling Campbell so damn lazy, and saying he was forced to cast the singer to capitalize on his popularity. Roger Ebert, in his review of the film, noted that Campbell needs some acting practice, and finds it difficult to make the dialogue convincing, though Campbell still earned a Golden Globe nomination for Most Promising Newcomer. One has to wonder what the film would have been with Elvis in that saddle. Fact number 5. Wayne's fear in the eye patch. As production approached, something unusual happened. John Wayne, the man who had faced down outlaws and enemy soldiers on screen for decades, got nervous. Rooster Cogburn was unlike anything Wayne had played before. Not a noble hero riding to the rescue, but an overweight, drunk, crude character wearing an eye patch that would limit his vision during difficult stunts. At 61 years old, Wayne had survived lung cancer surgery just 4 years earlier, losing an entire lung and 2 ribs in the process, and according to those close to the production, he got jumpy as filming approached because the combination of physical demands and a character outside his comfort zone had shaken his confidence. One practical concern involved the eye patch itself, specifically how Wayne was supposed to perform stunts and action sequences with half his vision blocked. Wardrobe supervisor Luster Bayless came up with an ingenious solution by crafting the eye patch from window screen mesh and gauze, creating a device that looked solid on camera but allowed Wayne to see through it. The Duke demanded a fresh patch every day because they got dirty, so Bayless kept a steady supply ready. When Wayne returned to set after filming another movie called The Undefeated, Bayless welcomed him back with a prank by outfitting every single cast and crew member with identical eye patches, making the entire set look like a convention of one-eyed fat men. One interesting detail about that eye patch is that it covered Wayne's left eye, which was the same eye over which his longtime director John Ford wore his own famous patch, and whether that was coincidence or tribute, nobody has ever said for certain. Bayless also used stretchy fabric for Wayne's pants to accommodate the weight he'd gained for the role and make mounting horses easier, proving that even the small details required creative solutions. Fact number 6. The line that broke Wayne's sacred rule. If you've seen True Grit, you remember the climactic confrontation when Ned Pepper, played by Robert Duvall, taunts Rooster Cogburn with one of the most famous insults in Western history, saying, "I call that bold talk for a one-eyed fat man." Rooster's response was equally legendary. "Fill your hand, you son of a bitch." That line represented the first on-screen profanity of John Wayne's entire career. For over 40 years and more than 150 films, Wayne had maintained a strict personal rule against cursing on camera because he believed his audience, including families and children, expected a certain standard from him. Wayne explained his reasoning for breaking that rule in interviews, saying, "At the emotional high point in that particular picture, I felt it was okay to use it. It would have been pretty hard to say you illegitimate sons of so-and-so." He had a point, because the moment demanded authenticity. Rooster Cogburn wouldn't have cleaned up his language in that situation, and neither could John Wayne if he wanted the scene to work. The film was initially rated M for mature audiences, but it was edited to remove other profanity and re-released with a G rating, and that single line apparently wasn't enough to keep families away. If that fact surprised you, make sure to subscribe if you love classic westerns, because there's plenty more where this came from, and we cover stories like this every day. Fact number 7. Kim Darby's secret terror. Remember how I mentioned that Kim Darby would bring her own challenges to the production? Here's what I meant. Kim Darby was terrified of horses, which is a problem when you're cast as the lead in a western, a genre that requires actors to spend significant time in the saddle. If you go back and watch the film carefully, you'll notice something. Approximately 5 minutes of screen time shows Darby actually riding a horse, and that's it. 5 minutes in a western where her character travels on horseback for most of the story. The solution was creative. A 65-year-old stunt woman named Polly Burson wore a clay mask of Darby's face during the riding sequences, meaning they literally created a prosthetic replica of Darby's profile and put it on an elderly stunt performer so the audience would think they were watching the young actress. Tension ran high between Darby and the director throughout production. In one scene, Darby struggled to naturally lead her horse, and Henry Hathaway lost his temper so badly that he threatened to spray her with a fire hose until assistants calmed him down. By the time production wrapped, Darby told producer Wallace that she would never work for Hathaway again because the experience had been that difficult for her. And yet, despite all the behind-the-scenes conflict with the director, Darby consistently praised John Wayne, saying, "He was wonderful to work with, he really was. He creates an environment that is very safe to work in. He was there on the set before anyone else and knew every line perfectly." That contrast tells you something about the different dynamics on that set. Fact number 8. The real Dennis Hopper gun story. You may have heard the legend that John Wayne chased Dennis Hopper around the lot with a loaded gun, one of those Hollywood stories that gets repeated so often people assume it must be true. The reality was less dramatic but still reveals the tensions that existed during production. Dennis Hopper himself explained what actually happened. Wayne would arrive at the set via helicopter from his minesweeper in Newport Beach, showing up in army fatigues with a .45 strapped to his hip as his standard arrival outfit. One day, Wayne was furious because his daughter had attended a UCLA event where Black Panther Eldridge Cleaver used profanity, and he stormed around the set asking where that pinko Hopper was hiding. Hopper, known for his counterculture politics and holding a very different worldview from the conservative Duke, decided discretion was the better part of valor and hid in Glenn Campbell's trailer until Wayne cooled down. "I think he wanted to have a political discussion," Hopper later explained, as opposed to committing actual manslaughter. What makes this story even more interesting is what happened afterward. Despite their political differences and Wayne's anger that day, there's no evidence of any lasting feud between the two actors, and they completed the film professionally. Hopper even had kind words for the director who had once tortured him on an earlier film called From Hell to Texas in 1958, when Hathaway forced Hopper to do more than 80 takes of a single scene, and yet Hopper later called Hathaway the finest director I have ever worked with. Hollywood relationships were complicated, it seems. Fact number 9. Robert Duvall and Wayne nearly came to blows. Dennis Hopper wasn't the only actor who had confrontations during production. Robert Duvall, who played the villain Ned Pepper, had his own run-ins with both the director and his leading man. Duvall was a method actor trained in a very different school of performance than old Hollywood veterans like Wayne and Hathaway, and that's when the clashes became almost inevitable. Duvall and director Hathaway had frequent shouting matches throughout the shoot, because their approaches to filmmaking were fundamentally incompatible. Hathaway wanted actors to hit their marks and deliver their lines, while Duvall wanted to explore character motivation and emotional truth. The real tension existed between Duvall and Wayne. According to reports from the set, the two actors nearly came to physical blows, with Wayne reportedly threatening to punch him. Picture that scene for a moment. John Wayne at 61 years old and recovering from cancer, squaring off against Robert Duvall in the middle of a Western production. Despite these tensions, Duvall later spoke warmly about Wayne, saying, "John Wayne was great working with. He was a good man and a very good natural actor, a lot better than a lot of people gave him credit for." That's high praise from a method actor about a star who was often dismissed by critics as just playing himself, and Duvall recognized something in Wayne's work that others missed. Fact number 10. Another blacklisted talent on set. Marguerite Roberts, the blacklisted screenwriter, wasn't the only one with that history. Jeff Corey, who played the villain Tom Chaney in True Grit, had also been blacklisted during the Hollywood Red Scare, and like Roberts, his career was derailed because of his political beliefs and associations. What makes Corey's story particularly interesting is what he did during the years he couldn't work as an actor. He became one of Hollywood's most influential acting teachers, with students who included some of the biggest names in the business. James Dean studied with Jeff Corey, along with Jack Nicholson, Leonard Nimoy, and Barbra Streisand. The man who couldn't get work as an actor ended up shaping the next generation of Hollywood talent. When Corey finally returned to acting, his role as Tom Chaney in True Grit carried significance because he was working alongside John Wayne, one of the most prominent conservatives in Hollywood, playing a memorable villain in a major production. Once again, Wayne had no qualms about it. Whatever his political beliefs, he didn't let them interfere with making the best possible film, and two blacklisted artists contributed essential work to True Grit, with Wayne supporting both of them. Fact number 11. The final stunt that terrified everyone. Wayne's fear about the physical demands of the role turned out to be justified, and everyone on set knew it. The final stunt of the production was the scene where Rooster jumps his horse over a 4-rail fence, and neither Hathaway nor Wayne was certain the actor could perform it. Wayne was 61 with one lung, playing a character who was supposed to be out of shape. The decision was made to save this scene for the absolute final shot of production so that if something went wrong, at least they'd have the rest of the movie in the can. Picture the tension as Wayne lined up for that take, knowing that a fall could end his career or worse. Wayne made the jump, the production wrapped, and everyone could finally breathe. That said, Wayne didn't do all his own stunts in the film. Stunt double Jim Burke performed the famous Meadow charge against Ned Pepper's gang, with Wayne appearing only in close-up during that sequence while actually riding on a trailer rather than horseback. Other doubles included Chuck Hayward and Chuck Roberson from Wayne's regular stunt team. That fence jump was all Duke. Fact number 12. The horse Wayne fell in love with. Something unexpected happened during the making of True Grit, when John Wayne fell in love with his horse. The horse's name was Dollar, sometimes called Old Dollar, a chestnut quarter horse gelding, and Wayne developed such a bond with this animal during production that he couldn't bear to part with him. Wayne had Dollar written into the script of The Shootist, his final film in 1976, as a contractual condition because he wanted to ride that same horse for what he knew might be his last Western. What speaks to how much that horse meant to him is what happened next. Wayne never let anyone else ride Dollar, and not until after Wayne's death did anyone else sit in that saddle. That's the kind of bond that forms between a cowboy and his horse, even when the cowboy is a movie star and the rides are for the camera. Dollar carried Wayne through several westerns after True Grit, becoming as essential to his later work as the hat on his head. Fact number 13. Where True Grit was really filmed. The story of True Grit unfolds in Arkansas and Oklahoma's Indian Territory, but if you've ever visited those places, you know they don't look anything like what appears in the film. Production actually took place in Ouray County, Colorado and Mammoth Lakes, California, with the Rocky Mountains standing in for the Ozarks, a geographical swap that purists noted but audiences embraced. The town of Ridgway, Colorado was transformed over 6 weeks into 1880s Fort Smith, Arkansas. Production crews built 5 blocks of buildings, including a 3-man gallows erected in Hartwell Park for the opening execution scene. The famous Fill Your Hand charge was filmed at a location called Katie's Meadow, also known as Deb's Meadow, with Chimney Rock visible in the background. Hot Creek near Mammoth Lakes served as the dugout cabin location where Moon and Quincy are killed, and according to local accounts, the gang's cave hideout, snake pit, and prop rocks reportedly still exist on private property outside Ouray. Filming stretched from September through December of 1968, with the Colorado winter providing the rugged backdrop that made the film feel authentic, even if the geography was all wrong. If you ever find yourself in that part of Colorado, you might be walking on the same ground where John Wayne won his Oscar. Fact number 14. The split vote that gave Wayne his Oscar. April 7, 1970, at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion, John Wayne won Best Actor at the 42nd Academy Awards. Barbra Streisand presented the award, and it was his only competitive Oscar after more than 40 years in Hollywood. What makes that win controversial is that many people believe Wayne only won because of a split vote. Look at who he was competing against. Richard Burton for Anne of the Thousand Days, Peter O'Toole for Goodbye Mr. Chips in what was his 4th of what would eventually be 8 nominations without ever winning, and the 2 stars of Midnight Cowboy, Dustin Hoffman and Jon Voight. Midnight Cowboy was the odds-on favorite that year, winning Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Adapted Screenplay while dominating the awards. Both Hoffman and Voight gave career-defining performances that critics praised as groundbreaking. And that's where the problem emerged for both of them. Academy members who loved Midnight Cowboy couldn't agree on which of its 2 leads deserved the award, with some voting for Hoffman and some voting for Voight, meaning neither got enough votes to win. Wayne's supporters were united behind a single candidate. The result was that John Wayne, playing a one-eyed fat man in a traditional Western, beat two of the most acclaimed performances of the decade because the votes against him were divided. Many in Hollywood interpreted the win as sentimental recognition, the Academy finally admitting they had underrated Wayne as an actor for decades. Both interpretations might be true. Fact number 15. The acceptance speech. Everyone remembers. When Barbra Streisand called his name, Wayne walked to the podium and opened with one of the most memorable lines in Oscar history. "Wow, if I'd have known that, I would have put that patch on 35 years earlier." The audience erupted because it was pure John Wayne, self-deprecating humor delivered with perfect timing. 35 years earlier would have been 1935, early in his career, suggesting he could have won an Oscar decades ago if only he'd found the right gimmick. Wayne appeared to brush back tears during his speech, mentioning that he'd previously collected honorary Oscars for John Ford and Gary Cooper, but saying he felt neither clever nor witty that night, just very grateful and very humble. For a man known for projecting strength and confidence on screen, that moment of vulnerability was striking. This was John Wayne, the most famous cowboy in movie history, getting emotional in front of his peers because they finally recognized his work. He later told Richard Burton that Burton deserved the Oscar more than he did, and whether that was genuine modesty or professional courtesy, it shows you something about how Wayne processed that victory. Even in his moment of triumph, he wasn't entirely comfortable accepting praise. Fact number 16. The roles that should have won. What might frustrate you is that the Academy failed to nominate John Wayne for what critics consider his greatest work. No nomination came for Stagecoach in 1939, the film that made him a star. No nomination for Red River in 1948, his complex turn as a cattle driver consumed by obsession. No nomination for The Quiet Man in 1952, and none for The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance in 1962. Most egregiously, no nomination for The Searchers in 1956, a film often called his finest performance and one of the greatest westerns ever made. Wayne plays a man driven by hatred and racism on a years-long quest, and his work in that film is nothing short of extraordinary. His only previous Best Actor nomination had come for Sands of Iwo Jima in 1950, which he lost to Broderick Crawford. When Wayne won for True Grit, a sense existed that the Academy was making up for decades of oversight. Director Howard Hawks defended the win, insisting it had nothing to do with sympathy or sentimentality, but with good acting, though others saw it as Hollywood finally acknowledging what audiences had known for years. John Wayne was a better actor than the critics gave him credit for. Fact number 17. The box office battle. $31.1 million domestically and $37.7 million worldwide. That's what True Grit earned against a production budget of approximately $3.5 million. A return on investment exceeding 10 times the budget. The film opened at Grauman's Chinese Theater on June 13, 1969, grossing $38,000 in its first week, and then building momentum through word of mouth, before reaching number 1 after 11 weeks in release. By domestic rentals, True Grit ranked between 8th and 10th among 1969 releases, earning $11.5 million in rentals. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid dominated that year with $45.9 million, and The Love Bug, Midnight Cowboy, and Easy Rider also outperformed it. The context makes the numbers interesting. 1969 was a transformational year for Westerns, with The Wild Bunch and Butch Cassidy representing a new, revisionist approach to the genre that questioned the myths traditional Westerns had created. True Grit stood as the old guard, the classic Western holding its ground against the upstarts. Adjusted for inflation, the domestic gross equals approximately $230 to $250 million in 2024 dollars, which is comparable to major modern releases and shows the film's commercial appeal hasn't been overstated by nostalgia. Fact number 18. The hidden details. Now let's get into some smaller details that even dedicated fans might not know. Wayne's hatband once belonged to Gary Cooper, a gift from Cooper to Wayne that he wore in the film, which creates a connection between two of the greatest Western stars in Hollywood history, linked by a simple piece of leather. The film marks the uncredited screen debut of Wilford Brimley, yes, that Wilford Brimley, who would go on to star in Cocoon, The Thing, and countless Quaker Oats commercials. He's somewhere in True Grit if you look carefully enough. Composer Elmer Bernstein scored the film with Glenn Campbell performing the Oscar-nominated title song, lyrics written by Don Black. The song lost to Raindrops Keep Fallin' on My Head from Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, meaning once again True Grit came up short against that particular Western. Wayne thought Hathaway edited the picture too tightly in post-production, and despite his Oscar win, Wayne was not entirely pleased with the finished film. He greatly disliked Kim Darby's performance and told interviewers that he had starred in much better films, citing Stagecoach as an example. That's a remarkable thing to say about the movie that won you an Oscar, but Wayne was never one to hide his opinions. Fact number 19. The strange coincidence. Here's something that will send a chill down your spine. True Grit's release date was June 11, 1969, and John Wayne died on June 11, 1979, exactly 10 years to the day. The film that defined the final chapter of his career, that gave him his only competitive Oscar, that proved he could still command the screen at 61 years old, was released precisely 1 decade before his death. Whether you believe in coincidence or something more, that symmetry is remarkable. True Grit marked a turning point in Wayne's career and his life, and the calendar itself seems to acknowledge that significance. Fact number 20. The legacy and what came after. Wayne reprised Rooster Cogburn in a sequel simply titled Rooster Cogburn in 1975, his only film with Katharine Hepburn. And here's a nice detail. Both actors were born in May of 1907. The sequel earned $17 million but received mixed reviews, with critics noting its heavy borrowing from The African Queen. Wayne's final public appearance came at the 51st Academy Awards on April 9, 1979, when he presented Best Picture to The Deer Hunter. He appeared gaunt and reportedly wore a wetsuit under his tuxedo to appear heavier, and the audience gave him a standing ovation. His response to that ovation was typical Wayne. That's just about the only medicine a fellow would ever need. 2 months later, he was gone. In 2010, the Coen brothers released their own adaptation of the Charles Portis novel starring Jeff Bridges as Rooster Cogburn, which grossed $252 million worldwide against a $38 million budget. Jeff Bridges earned his 4th Best Actor nomination for the role, 1 year after winning for Crazy Heart. The Coen brothers' version is considered more faithful to the novel because it maintains Mattie's first-person perspective, includes the bittersweet epilogue with elderly Mattie, and casts 13-year-old Hailey Steinfeld, much closer to the character's actual age than Kim Darby was. Joel Coen acknowledged the difference, saying the book is entirely in the voice of the 14-year-old girl. I think it's much funnier than the movie was, so I think unfortunately they lost a lot of humor in both the situations and in her voice. The 2010 version received 10 Oscar nominations but won none, becoming the first film to go 0 for 10 since Gangs of New York in 2002. Adjusted for inflation, both films performed remarkably similarly at the box office, somewhere between 160 and 170 million in equivalent domestic earnings. 50 years apart, two very different visions of the same story, both connecting with audiences. Only one gave us John Wayne in an eye patch, charging across a meadow with the reins in his teeth, shouting the first profanity of his career at a gang of outlaws. True Grit endures as both a turning point and a farewell. The moment Hollywood finally acknowledged John Wayne's artistry while the Western genre he defined was being reimagined by younger filmmakers. The production's chaos makes the film's ultimate success all the more striking. 7 actresses rejected the female lead. The director threatened his star with a fire hose, political confrontations erupted on set, and the leading man wasn't sure he could complete his own stunts. 2 blacklisted artists contributed essential work that Wayne, despite his politics, championed without hesitation. And yet somehow, out of all that turmoil, a classic emerged. The hidden story reveals Wayne at his most vulnerable, aging and recovering from cancer, worried about a role outside his comfort zone, yet ultimately delivering the performance that secured his legacy. That the Academy rewarded him for playing a one-eyed fat man, rather than his more conventionally heroic roles, carries its own irony. One Wayne acknowledged with characteristic humor the moment Barbra Streisand handed him that golden statue. "If I'd have known that, I would have put that patch on 35 years earlier." True Grit isn't just a Western, it's proof of what happens when talent, determination, and a little bit of luck come together. Wayne waited more than 40 years for that Oscar, survived lung cancer, faced down difficult directors and difficult co-stars, and broke his own rules when the story demanded it. In the end, he rode off into the sunset with the only competitive Academy Award of his career. Fill your hand, indeed. If you enjoyed this deep dive into True Grit, do me a favor and hit that like button. Leave a comment telling me your favorite John Wayne film, because I'd love to hear from you. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next video, since we've got plenty more stories to tell. Until next time, keep watching the classics.